Hi, writer. Want my support to get your book finished and out into the world? Join my Inner Circle membership, a community of supportive writers where each month we set goals, share pages, learn new techniques, and get you unstuck fast so that you can make continuous progress on your writing goals. Coached Writers Finish. And you can get me as your virtual book coach in this group program for only $199 a month, much less than a single one-on-one coaching session. Check out the details at susievidori.com/inner circle. We have live events happening all the time, so grab your spot now to join us. Welcome to the Show Don't Tell Writing Podcast with me, Susie Vidori, where I peel back the layers of how to wow your readers with your fiction, your nonfiction. Anybody can bang out a first draft, but it takes a little more work to make your book as amazing as it can be. Join me as I share the step-by-step writing techniques you could apply to your writing right away, as I host successful writers who share a behind-the-scenes look at their own writing lives, and as I live coach writers on their pages, giving practical writing examples that will make your own writing stronger. Nobody is born knowing how to write an engaging book. There are real and important skills that you need to learn. On this show, I cut through the noise and get you all the info you need. I can't wait to see how this information is going to transform your writing. What a treat on the podcast today. I have Dani Abernathy, who is a colleague of mine as an author accelerator book coach, and also just a really fierce and wonderful human being that I love being in the same room with. Their energy is just off the charts, and this interview is so much fun. They are an Enneagram teacher, and if you don't know what that means yet, then we actually will go into that on the podcast today. And Dani actually starts to analyze me, which I didn't edit out because I think it's important for you to see that I'm a real human being and to see the talent that Dani has. I've known Dani a long time and we work closely together, but they help deep thinkers and feelers, especially those from marginalized backgrounds. And we talk about that as well. What is that? Why is it important? Help them write the stories that they need to tell so that their readers can feel seen and can also see others. They specialize in fantasy, soft science fiction, young adult, and heart-centered fiction. Oh, my heart. Dani merges how story works with how people work, which I think is really important. Creating books that help readers have more empathy for themselves and for others. Dani themselves are an Enneagram Type 4, a Capricorn, an INFP in Myers-Briggs, and also a manifesting generator who believes that stories can change the world one reader at a time. I can't wait for you to hear this episode. I think it's going to affect you deeply. Welcome to the podcast today, my good friend and fellow book coach, Dani Abernathy. We are together at a book coaching conference in Denver and finally sitting down to do this podcast that I've been promising to do. We've been promising each other to do for you. We're going to talk to Dani because she has this absolute superpower of helping writers find their roots and putting themselves into their story. I love her process. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Welcome, Dani.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's been a year since you invited me on, so
It's been that's okay. And that was when we were last in person together. And this is the way it goes sometimes. And we talk all the time, but we don't always sit down and talk for your benefit, dear listeners and dear writers. So here today. Okay. So let's get down to brass tacks here, Dani. What is this all about? You work with writers to find their roots, right? And weave that into their stories. What does that mean?
yeah. So I use a process called the story tree process. It's kind of my signature system, and it's what I walk my clients through. And if you think of a tree, there's kind of 4 parts to a tree. I'm not an arborist, so there's probably more parts than 4. But you've got the root, you've got the tree trunk, you've got the branches, and you've got the leaves. So I think you, the author, are the roots of your story tree. I think you're the most important part because every part of your story comes from you. You are the only irreplaceable part of your story. And so I think it's really important that you understand yourself in general, but also in relation to your story and why you want to write and who you're writing to, what you want to get out of the process. So the next part is a tree trunk. And that's really like the point of your story. What do you want to say through your book? You can think of it as your worldview or your message. Some writers feel a lot of resistance to finding their points, which I totally understand. But the reason it's so important is because it connects you to your story. So when you know your tree trunk, you then know all of your story branches. So the story branches are your protagonist, your antagonist, your conflict, your world building. All of those elements grow from who you are and what you want to say to your reader. So I help people write their stories from the ground up. We start with the roots, and then we figure out what you want to say, and then we figure out how to grow all of your branches from that. And then when we have that structure figured out, then we write, which is all the leaves. And yeah,
I
what
love
we
that.
got.
What a cool metaphor. And I know I've heard you talk about it, but not in that much detail
Mm,
before. And I think, there's a lot of things that we teach that are similar. We start, in my language, we start with why. And then I talk about you're saying your message and what you want to say is the trunk. And that I talk about on this podcast a lot as what you want the reader to take away. Like what not necessarily what do you want to say, yes, but also what is it that you want the reader to experience? So that's really, really cool. I love how you did that. Most writers that come to us start with the leaves. Do you find that?
oh, yeah.
Where they try to start with the leaves, and that's the writing bits. And sometimes that can be okay, right, to kind of explore. But then why is that not where you necessarily want to start? Why do you have to go back to the roots, do you find, Dani, in your practice?
Right. So you can absolutely write a book without exploring your roots at all. And that's going to be a certain kind of book. And there's room for those books. If you are writing a book that is deeply personal to you in some way, that grows from your identity, your experience, even if you want to have a career as a writer, I think it's important to think about, like, why the hell are you doing this? And what does it mean to you? So a lot of people start with the leaves because, that's the place when you think about writing, you think about writing scenes and
It's the
writing.
fun part, right?
It's right.
Or part of it.
Yeah, depends on fun and terrible, depending on who you are. But most writers benefit from thinking about these structural parts, the roots, the tree trunk, the branches, before you get into all the writing, because I can tell you from experience that, you can write 100,000 words that it's just leaves lying on the ground. There's no tree. And so at some point,
I love that. I'm picturing actually little cutouts of your pages, handwritten pages, like leaves. I don't know. I'm a very visual person, as you all know.
fluttering in the wind right
Yeah.
now. So at some point, whether that's at the beginning or after you've written kind of a zero draft, you have to assess the structure of the story. Otherwise, more than likely, you're not going to have a story. You're just going to have
A bunch of things strung together, right? Yeah. And you're not going to hold the reader's attention at the end of the day without that structure. Readers are hardwired to accept story in a certain way. And if it's just kind of coming out as a bunch of leaves without all of that structure, yeah, I'm totally tracking with you. You're awesome. And I love something else that you said when you were explaining your root structure and the tree structure was that you are the only irreplaceable thing in your story, right? I wish you guys could see Dani nodding her head. Because that's I could give everybody that's listening to this podcast today the outline for my next book, and we could all go away and write it, and Dani could write it, and I could write it, and they'd be completely different because we're different people. So people get really precious about their ideas and worried about somebody stealing their idea. You know what? Steal all of my ideas. Go for it. You can't write my book and I can't write your book. And that's, I guess, the point is if you actually dig into those roots and build that structure, the tree, all the work that Dani does, you're going to get something really special, right? Because why do writers' backgrounds matter? How does that change the story? Do you find in your practice? I know you've done this many, many times with writers. How does it change their process or their story or their thinking?
I think we all have this idea that there shouldn't be too much of us in our stories, and that a good writer separates themselves from the story.
Oh my gosh, I'm like cringing when you even say that. But yes, you're right. That is what a lot of people think, or they want to be professional, or they have this idea of what authordom is or writing is. But
Right. Or like if you're writing a good book, I'm saying good in quotes,
air quotes.
yeah, I'm not actually doing them. And then I felt weird because I wasn't doing them. But if you're if you're writing a good book, then your protagonist shouldn't be you. And certainly your book, there's a place for writing a story as therapy, and that is not a book you publish. But I think most of the time, like, your protagonist is some version of you. And so I think the more honest you can be with yourself, the more honest you can be with your reader. And writing is a process of self-discovery. So as you discover yourself, you discover your story. As you discover your story, you discover yourself. And so you don't need this separation, because we need you in your story. You are the power, you are the magic, and you're the one that's gonna connect with your reader.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get there in a second about how it actually affects your reader, because it does. It's a totally different experience. But it's amazing how writers' stories are actually always personal. So if you're out there writing a book today and you think that you're just writing about, I don't know, butterflies, or what else are we writing about? I'm not sure. But not failing your creatives today. More insects, yes. No, but if you might think that you're just writing a story about fairies, or you're just writing a story about, I always go back to a client that I worked with many, many years ago, and we did some of the exercises that Dani and I probably do similar but differently with our clients. And she realized that even though she was writing about creatures, she was actually writing about her childhood. And it was one of those things where she laughed about it. It was like, wow, that's really unexpected, right? So think about it. And if you're thinking, oh, I'm just writing something commercial or something that I like, you might actually find that you're writing something else, right? And it's almost always personal.
I
Why not?
agree. Certainly the people I work with tend to be exploring their own questions and their own experiences. Often they're like existential questions that we don't actually have answers to, which makes it hard to sometimes write a novel, because often in the novel you're trying to answer the question.
I love it though, like really big. Yeah, I have those questions daily. So I maybe need to read more of your clients' work, I think, to answer them. But how does wrapping your own roots into your fiction, because we're specifically talking about fiction here, how does that differ from memoir, let's say? Because it's not, people will come and say, well, I don't want to write my story, right? Lots of people want to. Specifically, we're talking about how is this different?
We'll be right back.
Is your podcast driving real results, or does it feel like a lot of effort with very little return? If you're a podcaster using your show to grow your business, then Podcasting Amplified is the podcast for you. You may have launched expecting listeners to flock in, but instead you're stuck on a handful of downloads while juggling recording, editing, promotion, and wondering what's missing. Well, Podcasting Amplified delivers no fluff episodes packed with real-world tips and strategies on positioning, recording, growth, and turning your podcast into something that actually supports your goals. So search Podcasting Amplified on your favourite podcast app today and start building a podcast that gets results.
I have one memoir client right now, my first memoir client. And memoir is really about telling the true things that happen to you. And there is a narrative thread there. You're reflecting on things. There's a character arc. You change and grow in relation to the things that happen to you. But fiction is really about whether you're writing autofiction, which is almost like a fictionalization of the real things that happen to you, or you're writing, like most of my clients are writing speculative fiction. And it's really cool in fantasy and sci-fi, because then you can put a lot of those things into, like, through a symbolic lens, or you can make the invisible visible. And so you're not sharing the things that happen to you, but often you are sharing the impact of what happened to you.
Yeah.
Or
the emotional truth.
That's right.
Of what happened.
Yeah.
Right? I know when I wrote my first few novels that were published, I was kind of terrified when they came out, because all of my characters had pieces of past people or relationships and things and situations. And I mean, they're fictionalized, but it felt like a thin veil to me. But I can tell you that people who read them did not see themselves, because they don't know how you see them through your lens, right? Or many of those people would never have read my YA fiction to begin with, that people that I grew up with or that I experienced. these things with when I was in high school,
Mhm.
right? Or in junior high, as the case may be. But yeah, it's amazing how we worry sometimes about putting ourselves in there, but that is actually not something that everybody recognizes.
Yeah, but it does feel really risky because you're exposing yourself, you're making yourself vulnerable, and often about things that maybe you haven't shared with anyone else.
Is there a risk, do you think? I mean, it feels risky. There's a difference between it feeling risky and it being risky. I'm saying in my experience, it felt very risky. And in the end, it wasn't. But what is your experience? Because you work with this all the time with clients, right?
Right. And so I think, first of all, most of the time, the people you're writing about from your real life aren't going to recognize themselves in your story. But I do think if you're a person with like a marginalized identity, if you're a trans person, or, I live in the United States and there's a lot of stuff going on here that's scary. And so if you hold an identity that isn't as accepted, there can be actual risk to writing about,
Yeah, fair.
queer characters, or writing a story about racism, or whatever your lived experience may be. So that's something that you really have to recognize, I think. Like, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to tell the story about this thing? And, what might I encounter if I put this book out in the world?
Yeah, and you work with historically marginalized writers, many different kinds. And what does this mean, and why is it important to represent them in publishing, despite that risk that you just
Mhm.
mentioned?
Yeah, so a historically marginalized person holds an identity that hasn't been the mainstream. So I would say sort of our non-marginalized identities are white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, often like Protestant, Christian, certainly, in the Western world. Marginalized identities are people who Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer people, neurodivergent people, people with disabilities. And I think it's so important that we get stories from everybody out into the world, and especially people with marginalized identities, because most of our stories have been from non-marginalized identities. For some reason, I can't think of a good term for what these identities are that aren't marginalized. But when we read books about people who are different from us, our empathy grows and our understanding grows, and often you see yourselves recognized, and to feel seen is so powerful, and to also see someone else, I think, is exactly what we need right now. So I'm kind of on a mission to like change the world through quiet little books.
And as you've ever met Daddy, I mean, I have no doubt that you are going to be able to do this. It's such but it's such an important mission that we both share in lots of ways, that communication is the key. It's the key to understanding. And so having books written from many, many different perspectives is the key to understanding, to empathy, as you said, because right now the world is very divisive. So whatever side of that division you're on, the answer or the remedy is never going to be to cut off all other sides. It's to open the lines of communication and to understand one another's points of view that's going to get us through that.
And I think I know from my own experience, like I used to be pretty homophobic and transphobic, and now I understand about myself that I am non-binary and bisexual. And one of the things that has had the greatest impact on my life is reading fiction and reading about the experiences of people who I know now are a lot more similar to me than I thought. And
so growing up without that lens, right?
That's right.
Or without that experience. Yeah, no, amazing. Okay, so we talked about a few like marginalized identities, but what types of group make sense to include in writers' books? Like, what other things do you uncover? Because it might be a marginalized identity, but what else might there be that people are exploring that you uncover in your work that makes sense?
Yeah, so there's a lot of pieces we explore, like I have a group program called the Rooted Writers Mentorship, and we have a curriculum, and the whole first module is about exploring yourself. And we talk about kind of your backstory and your values, We talk about your need. So all of that I think is important to consider. But when we're talking about an individual story, often what comes through is something you are deeply passionate about. So that could be, like for my clients, that's often environmentalism or some sort of oppression or invisibleness, some way of not fitting into the mainstream. And yeah.
So, Dani, you actually use this really cool tool. I don't know, is it a tool called the Enneagram? What is it? You first introduced me to it, I think, way back in 2020 when we met. And it's something that you're super passionate about and has, really helped your business shape the way that you work with writers. Can you talk a little bit about that, what it means?
Yeah. So the Enneagram is a personality system that we talk about types. So types 1 through 9. And so I'm type 4, which is the individualist. The reason I love the Enneagram, the reason it works so well for writing is because it's not just about characteristics. It's not just about traits. It's about why you have those traits. So
it's a personality.
It's a personality, right. And so it talks about your desires and fears. And that's what we need to understand about our characters. And so it's incredibly helpful for developing characters. And it's also incredibly helpful for understanding yourself and why you're writing. So, for example, I'm a type 4 and I write to understand myself and to express myself. I want to be understood. And I also want to make people ugly cry.
You ugly cry all the time. I love it.
No, you're a type 3, which is the achiever. And so for type 3, like what matters more is like the success, honestly. And so if threes are going to write a book, often they want it to be a really good book and they want it to do
I wanted to reach as many people as possible, but you're right. And knowing that about myself actually helps my clients as well. And you'll hear me say this all the time, but Dani just said it's true. Actually, the reason I do this work, I actually only care that my clients get to write the books that they want, that they are successful, whatever that definition is for them. So success doesn't always mean like bestseller. I mean, yes, some of them are bestsellers and things like that, but it doesn't have to be that. Success to me is, did you reach your goal, whatever that is, writers?
Yeah.
Dani's going to jump in and tell me something about myself.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear.
You know, my thing.
Okay, I'm getting coached right now.
Yeah,
You're here on the podcast.
You have to, okay, so I don't want to get too into the weeds of the Enneagram.
No, this is great. It gives them a sense for how you coach. It's
okay,
cool.
So there's different centers in the Enneagram, and one of them is the heart center, and these are types 2, 3, and 4. So 2 is the helper, 3 is the achiever, and 4 is the individualist. And these types, well, they need other people to reflect back their chosen image, but these types are really oriented to people and they read people and they adjust according to how people are responding to them. And I know for a fact that your core type is in the heart center. You might be a 2 though, Susie, which is the helper, because you are so other oriented. And I think you give so much and choose.
What did I tell you, writers, about the ugly cry? Here we go. Keep going, Dani.
Well, this part you might not like, but 2 often give love to get loved, and they give and give and give, hoping that people are then going to give back to them and meet their own needs. And they have a really hard time expressing their own needs. Yeah. And
that all tracks.
Yeah.
All tracks. Let's be a little bit vulnerable here, right?
So anyway, you're a 2 or 3. I don't know.
I know. We've had this conversation before. And when I do the test, when I do the exercises, I am very close on a number of different numbers. So, but yes, it's a really cool tool. Okay, so you mentioned a little bit. It helps writers, yes, understand their own desires, but it also helps them design their characters. So how does it help then, knowing this about themselves, and when you work with clients from this, how does it help them with their writing process or their story or all of the above, or even how does it help them manage the emotional roller coaster of writing a book in the first place?
Oh gosh. Right? Yeah. So the Enneagram is an incredible tool for understanding your characters, for building your characters. And it can help you write deep, authentic characters. So it enables you to go beneath the surface Well, first of all, really understand how your characters will behave in a situation, which I think sometimes we just have them like puppeting around doing random stuff. But also, it can
Drinking tea. I always see people drinking tea. I'm like, your characters aren't doing anything in the scene. I know I talk about it. If you listen to this podcast, you could probably have a drinking game about drinking tea on my podcast when I talk about it. Yeah. Popping around doing random stuff. I like that too.
Right. Instead of making choices based on what they actually want or what they're afraid of, what they're trying to avoid. And so the Enneagram can make that really clear really quickly. Another way that I find that it helps writers is when you're drafting or revising, sometimes you can feel like a character is just really flat, or maybe some of your characters are quite similar to each other. So the Enneagram I love because it's both so deep, but also you can look at a type and understand what kind of language they're going to use, what kind of mannerisms they might use, even what kind of like clothes they might wear. So if you're feeling really stuck, you can, for example, find celebrities who are type 7s, which is the adventurer, and like go look at how they behave in the world and use that to inform your writing so that your characters feel real and not the same as each other, and not flat.
I love that as a process for designing that. Okay. And we can include a link to a test if you're interested in learning surface level about your own Enneagram.
Yes.
Okay. So you talked about creating the magic and bringing your roots in and bringing yourself into the story, creating magic. But how does including this actually affect your readers? We like to talk a lot on the Show Don't Tell podcast, not just about your own process, but how we're actually affecting readers and getting our message out there. So how does including yourself create that connection?
For me, there are 4 things that are most important to know about your book so that you can know what choices to make to get you where you want to be. So one is who you are, why you care about this. The second is your point, what you want to say. The third is who you are writing to. And I don't mean like teenage girls. I mean like
Housewives between the ages of 35 and 45.
That's right. But like, why does your reader come to your book? What are they going to take away? What are they looking for? What are they hungry for? Like, what questions do they have? So on a deeper level, like who are you writing to? And then like, how do you want to impact them? So, it's one thing to know your message, but let's say your message is something about climate change. Do you want to write a tragedy? Do you want to impress on the reader the reality of climate change and that it's real? Or do you want to leave them feeling hopeful and empowered?
I think that was a bit of a leading answer there. I think we probably want them to feel hopeful and empowered. And maybe that is how you choose what genre, because this advice that you're giving actually transcends genre.
Yeah.
It works for all the ones.
But often, whether you want it to be positively or negatively will help you determine your genre. And most of the time, I think we want the reader to end the book feeling something good. Sometimes you don't. You want to write a tragedy, or you want to really leave the reader feeling uncertain or confused.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But then pick your genre, because not all genres will accept that as an ending.
Right.
No, don't write a romance. Don't write a romance. You want happily ever after, or at least happily ever after for now, or you're going to get canned in your reviews.
Absolutely.
Or don't call it a romance.
Just want a love story.
Exactly. Okay, so I know that coaching writers through this process brings you so much joy. What does this work mean to you?
So this is a great example of your roots, because when I think about my business, it feels like it has grown from me entirely. And every part of it is influenced by who I am and what I care about, my values. I think emotional bravery is so important. I think agency, dignity, vulnerability, like all of these are my values. And so the way I work with writers is built around these ideas. And right now, with the way the world looks in 2026, coming to my coaching calls with my clients gives me hope. I often feel hopeless, and it also helps me to feel like I am taking action towards positive change, action toward the world I want to live in, because I truly believe that stories can change the world. And so if I can help writers get out stories that make people accept themselves more, make people accept other people more, that feels so meaningful to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And Dani, I just want to say that it's my absolute pleasure and honor to watch you build this business and to stay true to all of that and to build our businesses alongside one another and to push each other to grow and change and help as many writers get their stories out into the world as possible. Yeah, it is very, very rewarding work. It can be very rewarding to write your book. And hopefully today's episode, thank you so much, Dani, for sharing all of that, because it's given writers a lot of food for thought as they go through. Where can we find you and your programs?
The best place to find me is my website, which is DaniAbernathy.com. Dani is spelled Dani. And you can sign up for my newsletter, which is called The Quiet Book Revolution. I am launching a podcast. Maybe it's already out or maybe it's soon to be out, but it's called Writing from the Margins. So you can find me there. Those are probably the best places.
Yeah, we will definitely share all of those links. And when your podcast comes out, whenever that is, in the next few months, we will be sure to share that with our listeners as well. Thank you so much for coming on, Dani. And now onward. Thanks, Susie. Thanks for tuning in to the Show Don't Tell Writing Podcast with me, Susie Vidori. It is my absolute honor to bring you the straight goods for that book you're writing or the book that you're planning to write. Please help me keep the podcast going by helping people find us. You can subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening to show how much you enjoy the show. That's how other listeners will find us. Also, visit susievidori.com/newsletter to hop on my weekly inspired writing newsletter list, where you'll stay inspired and be the first to know about all the upcoming training events and writing courses that happen in my community. Want my eyes on your writing? Submit a page of your current draft for a chance to come on the podcast at the link in the show notes. I'd love to chat with you about your writing in my always positive, incredibly supportive way, so that you can make great strides towards your writing goals. I'm here to cheer you on. Remember, that book you're writing is going to open doors that you haven't even thought of yet, and I can't wait to help you make that it the absolute best it can be. See you again right here next week.